What do you know about Japanese, kid? Blake Sterling's voice hissed, cold and sharp as a sliver of ice aimed directly at Chloe Miller. It wasn't a question, but a verbal slap. It all started with a single sound, a small, clear, crisp chuckle that had inadvertently escaped her lips. That sound, fleeting as it was, cut like a shard of glass through the suffocating silence of the conference room at the Sterling Tower headquarters in Manhattan. Just moments before, the problem lay with the translator, Mark Thompson, who stood beside Blake, sweat beading on his forehead as he struggled to interpret an implicit remark from their Japanese counterpart, Mr. Hiroshi Nakamura. Mr. Sterling, Mark stammered. He means marketing. Ah, sales in their market are very important. Blake frowned. A superficial and inaccurate translation. He knew he was losing credibility in a multi-million-dollar deal with the Sumitomo Corporation. And then, that small chuckle echoed from the hallway, where Chloe Miller was waiting for her mother, Sarah Miller, to finish her shift. Blake's frustration over the failing deal immediately found a perfect target to unleash itself upon. Blake spun around. "Miss Miller," he spat. "Not a question, but an accusation. Is this a workplace or a daycare?" Sarah flinched, startled enough to drop the cleaning cloth she held. She quickly pulled her daughter closer, her voice flustered. "I'm so sorry, sir, truly sorry." Chloe apologized to Mr. Sterling at once, but Blake ignored her. He strode directly in front of Chloe and delivered the condescending remark. Now he stood there, arms crossed, waiting for an apology, or perhaps tears. But Chloe didn't bow her head. She looked up, her clear eyes meeting the CEO's gaze directly, without a hint of fear. In the thick silence, her voice rang out, clear and steady. I can translate what he said more accurately. Chloe's words hung in the air. A stunned silence enveloped the conference room. Mark, the translator, gaped. Sarah looked as if she might faint. And then Blake Sterling laughed. It wasn't a joyful laugh, but a dry, sarcastic sound that erupted from his chest. He shook his head as if he'd just heard the world's most pathetic joke. "Ha ha! And what makes you so credible?" Blake sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "Youthful confidence? Do you even know this is $100 million meeting? Or is your world in the Queensboro just candy and pipe dreams?" "Chloe, be quiet." Sarah hissed in desperation, trying to grab her daughter's arm, but Chloe ignored them all. She didn't look at Blake, nor at her mother. Her gaze was fixed on the large screen where Mr. Hiroshi Nakamura and the Japanese partners watched everything with puzzled expressions. She took a deep breath, bowed respectfully, and then spoke. Her words were a perfect stream of Japanese, flowing with astonishingly accurate intonation. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "I sincerely apologize for this interruption. There was a slight misunderstanding in the previous translation." The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Mark, the translator, was frozen. Sarah's hand dropped from her daughter's arm, her eyes wide with horror on the screen. The frown on Mr. Nakamura's face dissolved, replaced by utter astonishment. Chloe turned back to Blake, switching to pristine English. "Mr. Sterling, your partner wasn't just talking about the importance of sales. He was emphasizing that subtlety in approaching the local market is vital, not merely a direct translation." Then she turned back to the screen, asking the partner directly in Japanese, "Has your meaning been conveyed accurately now?" The eldest partner, Mr. Nakamura, burst into laughter. A hearty, booming laugh. He nodded vigorously, then looked directly at Blake and spoke in English. Sterling-san, this young lady, she is correct, absolutely accurate. He paused for a moment, a smile still on his lips. In fact, she sounds even more natural than your professional translator. The astonishment on Blake's face quickly hardened into an inscrutable, icy expression. The compliment from the Japanese partner, instead of diffusing the situation, felt like a slap to his ego. To be upstaged by a child in his own domain, in front of his business partners, was an unacceptable humiliation. He couldn't let the story end here. He had to regain control. This deal isn't just about Tokyo, Blake abruptly declared, his voice ringing with authority, attempting to steer the conversation back to his terms. He turned to Chloe, his gaze sharp as if interrogating a rival, not a 14-year-old girl. And then he switched to French, the language of another crucial market they were targeting in Paris. What about the exclusive distribution terms for the European market? It was a surprise attack, an attempt to prove that this was his world, with his rules. Chloe didn't blink. She replied immediately in elegant and precise French. The terms are clear, sir, but they do not include digital streaming platforms, which could be a costly oversight. Her answer wasn't just a translation. It was a strategic insight. Blake felt the air sucked from his lungs. This girl didn't just know languages. She understood the business. Blake's bewilderment had now transformed into illogical stubbornness. He wouldn't lose. He would delve into the most obscure corner of his knowledge, something that surely no public library book could teach. He recalled a proverb he'd learned years ago during a charity trip to Kenya. He looked directly at Chloe and spoke in the deep, resonant tones of Swahili. Umoja ni nguvu, utengano ni udhaifu. Do you understand? Unity is strength, division is weakness. He said it with a wicked smugness, convinced this would be the final barrier she couldn't overcome. But Chloe merely tilted her head, a soft, almost sympathetic smile briefly touching her lips. And then she replied in the same language, her voice smooth and remarkably natural. Ndio, ninaelewa vizuri sana, Bwana Sterling. Na nguvu ya kweli haitoki mahali ulipozaliwa, bali kutoka kwa unachochagua kuifunza. Yes, I understand very well, Mr. Sterling. And true strength does not come from where you were born, but from what you choose to learn. This time, there was no more silence. A gasp of astonishment escaped one of the Japanese partners on the screen. Mark, the translator, slumped into his chair, pale. Sarah brought a hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks, not from fear, but from an almost unbelievable pride. Blake Sterling stood motionless. The entire fortress of prejudice he had built his life upon about race, class, and human worth was shaking to its foundations. He stared at the 14-year-old girl before him, and for the first time in his life, he was utterly speechless. The dead silence in the conference room was finally broken, not by a voice within the room, but from the giant screen. The elderly Japanese partner, Mr. Hiroshi Nakamura, who had laughed so heartily before, now looked at Chloe through the camera with genuine respect. "Young lady," he said in English, his voice deep and warm, "that was extraordinary. Where did you learn all this?" His question hung in the air, a sincere invitation rather than an interrogation. All eyes, including Blake's, turned to Chloe, awaiting an explanation for the unbelievable events unfolding. Chloe glanced at her mother, as if seeking permission. Sarah, still stunned, simply nodded instinctively. "My mom couldn't afford childcare for her night shifts," Chloe began, her voice simple and direct, devoid of any self-pity. So, from a young age, I often came with her. And the only place I could sit quietly for hours while waiting for her was the Queen's Public Library. She looked into space, as if revisiting those very book-lined corridors. I started with audiobooks because they were free. I listened to stories from all over the world. Then I found old foreign language textbooks that people had discarded in a corner. No one ever checked them out. A silence fell as everyone in the room pictured the scene. A small girl nestled among dusty bookshelves with headphones and a well-worn textbook. I realized each language was like a key, Chloe continued, her eyes shining. It opened up a different world. It helped me hear stories from Paris, Tokyo, or Nairobi. Even when I was still sitting in Queens, she turned to look directly at Blake, and this time there was no challenge in her eyes, only a simple truth. I didn't learn to impress, sir. I learned so I could listen and connect with a world much bigger than my neighborhood. That explanation, sincere and unembellished, was a blow even more powerful than her linguistic performance. It transformed Chloe's extraordinary feat into something comprehensible, yet simultaneously far more admirable. Blake Sterling said nothing. He looked from Chloe to her mother, who was quietly wiping away tears, and his own condescending words, a janitor's kid, the Queen's ghetto suddenly echoed in his mind, bitter and stark. A flush of shame began to creep in, mixed with an irresistible curiosity about the extraordinary talent standing right before him. His fortress of prejudice had been breached, and he was beginning to waver. The online meeting concluded in unprecedented awkwardness. The Japanese, French, German, and Kenyan partners politely said their goodbyes, but their lingering glances at Chloe spoke volumes. An hour later, in the opulent stillness of his penthouse office, Blake Sterling still couldn't settle. The initial shame and astonishment had cooled, giving way to a turbulent mix of emotions: annoyance at being outmaneuvered by a child, a grudging admiration, and above all, skepticism. An impressive performance, yes, but improvising a few sentences was far different from enduring the pressure of a real negotiation. His businessman's logic told him what he had just witnessed was impossible. And Blake Sterling didn't believe in the impossible. He believed in tests. He picked up the phone. "Tell Miss Miller and her daughter to come to my office immediately." When Chloe and her mother entered, Sarah kept her head bowed, wringing her hands, bracing for the worst. Chloe, in contrast, stood tall, silent, and observant. Blake didn't invite them to sit. He rose, pacing around his enormous desk like a predator. "An interesting display," he began, his voice flat and emotionless. "But this conference room is not a stage." He stopped in front of them, hands in his pockets. "Next Thursday, we have a multilateral online conference to finalize the contract for a new media project. Its value isn't a few million, but hundreds of millions of dollars. There will be partners from Paris, Tokyo, Nairobi, and Berlin. 4 languages will be spoken simultaneously, at breakneck speed." He looked directly at Chloe, his gaze sharp. "My best translators are hesitant. They say it's an impossible task. Talent in an empty room is very different from composure under real pressure." Blake smirked, a cold smile. "I have a proposition for you." Sarah looked up sharply, a bad feeling rising within her. "You will participate in that conference. As a lead translator," Blake said, each word like a knife. "Prove to me that what you did tonight wasn't a fluke." He moved closer, his voice dropping to a whispered threat. "These are the rules of the game. If you fail even one small mistake that offends a partner, One hesitation that disrupts the flow of work, your mother will be fired immediately, without explanation. Sarah gasped. Horror etched on her face. No! Sir, please don't! She's just a child! Blake ignored her, his eyes still fixed on Chloe. But, he said, if you succeed, if you can handle that chaos perfectly, I will consider giving you an opportunity. A real opportunity. It was a cruel gamble, a power play disguised as a chance. He was placing the future of their entire family on the shoulders of a 14-year-old girl. Sarah shook her head wildly, tears welling in her eyes. We can't. Chloe, let's go home. But Chloe didn't move. She looked straight into Blake's eyes, seeing through his smugness, his skepticism, and even a flickering hint of curiosity. She looked at her mother, seeing her fear and desperate love. She knew this wasn't a fair chance. It was a trap, but it was also their only way out. She took a deep breath, the weight of the world seemingly on her shoulders. I'll do it, she said, her voice unwavering. I accept the challenge. The door to Blake Sterling's penthouse office slammed shut behind them, leaving behind a cold, luxurious space. But the elegant hallway leading to the elevator now felt like a path to the gallows. Are you crazy, Chloe? Sarah whispered as they entered the elevator, her voice breaking with fear and anger. Do you know what you just agreed to? We'll be out on the street. He's just looking for an excuse to fire me. She turned to her daughter, grabbed her shoulders, and shook her gently as if to rouse her from a trance. This isn't a game in the library, sweetheart. This is our life. He'll devour you. You're just a child. Chloe remained silent until the elevator doors opened in the damp, oil-scented basement parking garage. She looked at her mother, her eyes clearer and more serious than ever. Mom, she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. He underestimated us from the very first moment. Whether I do this or not, he will never see you as a person. She took a breath. This isn't a choice between safety and danger. This is our only option. If I don't do it, you could still be fired tomorrow for some ridiculous reason. But if I do, if I succeed, they will never be able to look down on us again. Sarah looked deep into her daughter's eyes. She saw not the innocence of a child, but an iron will, a mature wisdom forged from long nights in the library and days witnessing her mother's struggles. Her fear remained, but it began to yield to another feeling, a glimmer of faith in her extraordinary daughter. She said nothing more. She simply pulled Chloe into a tight embrace, an embrace that held all a mother's fear, love, and silent prayers. On the day of the conference, Chloe sat in a modern, soundproof interpreting booth, a space unfamiliar compared to the familiar table corners at the Queen's Public Library. She wore a simple white shirt, looking small amidst the sophisticated equipment. Beside her, two professional interpreters, a man and a woman about her mother's age, watched her with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. As soon as the conference began, the atmosphere in the booth became tense. 4 screens displayed 4 feeds from Paris, Tokyo, Nairobi, and Berlin. Delegates spoke almost simultaneously, one language overlapping another, creating a chaotic jumble of sounds. After just 10 minutes, the two professional interpreters began to show signs of being overwhelmed. The man repeatedly pressed the hold button, asking the German delegate to slow down. The woman frowned, her fingers flying across the keyboard, trying to catch up with the idiomatic phrases of the French delegate. Please repeat. The signal isn't clear. Their voices were filled with confusion. But Chloe was different. She was utterly calm. Her eyes never left the screens, her headphones pressed tightly. One hand held a pen, gliding across a page at lightning speed. But she wasn't writing words, she was drawing. Strange symbols, icons, and lines only she understood. A system of shorthand she had created herself from thousands of hours of listening to audiobooks. And then, when a rare pause occurred, she activated her microphone. Her clear, calm voice resonated in the headphones of all the delegates. "Mr. Dubois from Paris," she began, "your points on exclusive licensing for digital content are sharp. However, Miss Schmidt from Berlin has just raised a concern about EU antitrust laws potentially affecting this clause. Meanwhile, Mr. Nakamura from Tokyo has proposed a regional licensing model to address the issue. And Mr. Nakamura from Tokyo has proposed a regional licensing model. Onyango from Nairobi wants to know if that model would apply to emerging markets in Africa." She had done the impossible. She didn't just translate. She had synthesized, analyzed, and connected four complex conversations into a coherent and accurate summary in a single utterance. She wasn't just a translation machine. She was a true bridge. In the control room, Blake Sterling stood frozen, staring at the monitoring screen. Silence enveloped the conference. Then, the Japanese delegate, Mr. Nakamura, who had met Chloe via screen before, activated his microphone. He didn't speak about the contract. He spoke about Chloe. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said in English, "for all to understand, I have been in this industry for 30 years. I have worked with hundreds of interpreters." He paused, then looked directly into the camera, as if speaking directly to the young girl in the booth. "But this is not just translation. This is art." And then he stood up and clapped, alone. After a stunned second, the French delegate stood, then the Kenyan, finally the German. Four people from four corners of the world, standing and applauding a 14-year-old unknown girl from Queens. When the conference concluded with accolades for the genius translator, Blake didn't return to his penthouse office. He went directly to the interpreting booth. He opened the door. The two professional interpreters stood up, their faces a mixture of embarrassment and profound admiration. Chloe was taking off her headphones, her small shoulders slightly slouched with fatigue, but her eyes were still bright. Sarah was already standing by the door, her face tear-streaked, ready to embrace her daughter no matter the outcome. Blake stepped in, and silence fell. He looked at Chloe, not with the eyes of a CEO looking at a child, but like a seasoned artist admiring raw talent. "I was wrong," he said, a simple yet heavy confession. "I was wrong to judge a person by their uniform." He turned to Sarah, who was holding her breath in tension. "Miss Miller, you are not fired." Blake paused, then continued, clearly and decisively. "Starting tomorrow, you will take on a new position, Human Resources Services Manager for this building. I need someone with integrity and good judgment in that role. Clearly, your daughter inherited that from you." Sarah was stunned, her hands trembling as she brought them to her mouth. Blake turned back to Chloe. "As for you," he said, "talent like yours cannot be wasted anywhere, and certainly not limited by circumstances. The Sterling Corporation will establish a special scholarship called the Chloe Miller Global Scholarship, and you will be its first recipient." He looked directly into her eyes. "It will fully fund your studies in languages and international relations at any university in the world you desire. The corporation will invest in your talent, Chloe Miller." For a moment, Chloe was speechless. She looked at her mother, who was weeping with boundless joy. She looked at the powerful man before her, who just days ago had dismissed her as dirt, and who was now offering her an entire future. She didn't smile triumphantly. She simply stood tall, nodded respectfully, the burden of the challenge now replaced by the weight of a life-changing opportunity. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice still clear and steady. "I will not let you down." The story of Chloe Miller could not be contained within the four walls of a conference room. It exploded. Days later, financial news outlets and social media began circulating an unbelievable story. Headlines appeared everywhere, from the front page of the Wall Street Journal to influential tech blogs. One 4-year-old from Queenston's Global Business World. The articles recounted how a $100 million negotiation had been saved by an extraordinary linguistic talent, a young girl, the daughter of a janitor, who had learned everything on her own in a public library. Chloe's image, simple in her white shirt, with wise and calm eyes, was juxtaposed with the glittering skyscrapers of New York. She immediately became a symbol, a living testament to the American dream, an inspiration for millions of children growing up in challenging circumstances. For Blake Sterling, this story was more than just a PR boost for the corporation. Every time he saw an article, every time he heard Chloe Miller's name on TV, he remembered his own contemptuous voice. "What do you know, kid?" That shame became a catalyst. He began to look at his building differently. He didn't just see the senior executives, but also the janitors, the security guards, the invisible people he had previously overlooked. He wondered how many other hidden talents, how many other Chloe Millers were among them, waiting for an opportunity. His change didn't stop at thoughts. Months later, the Sterling Corporation announced a groundbreaking new initiative, the Chloe Miller Global Language Program. It was a multi-million-dollar fund designed to identify and nurture linguistically gifted children from underserved and low-income communities across the country. At the press conference, Blake Sterling, a man renowned for his toughness and pragmatism, spoke with rare sincerity. "Talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not. Our mission is to build the bridge between them." Chloe's story is not just a modern fairy tale. It is a powerful affirmation. It proves that a person's worth is never determined by their origin, skin color, or social status. It lies in their talent, their relentless effort, and an iron will to rise above. It shows that language is not just a tool for communication. In the hands of a brave young girl, it became a weapon to fight prejudice, a key to unlock a bright future, and a bridge to connect worlds that once seemed destined never to intersect. And ultimately, the story teaches us that the true value of a person is not determined by their skin color or where they were born, but by their ability and their unwavering will to never surrender to fate.